Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin, daf Kufchet, Shavua Tov. We're going to get started from the Mishnah at the top of our daf. So now we have our classic case, Tipat Chalav, Shenafla ala Chaticha, or maybe it's not exactly your classic case, the first one anyway. We have milk that falls into a pot of meat, but it falls onto a piece of meat. And according to Rashi, we're talking about Betoch HaKdera, it's in the pot, al echat min chatichot. So you have some stew going on, but the milk touches specifically one piece of meat in the stew. Tosfot says, K'shachaticha kula chutz larotev ayre. Tosfot says, no, wait. We're talking that this piece of meat is completely out of the sauce. It's on top, but outside the sauce. If it was in the sauce, it would be a different story. You'll see in a minute what we're going to say. Im yesh ba benoten tam be'ota chaticha asul. If the milk gives flavor into the one piece of meat, that's going to be a problem. In other words, we only measure the one piece of meat against the milk. So we need 60 times. If the meat is 60 times the milk, we're good. If it's less than that, it's a problem. But we don't measure everything in the pot because we assume that the milk went specifically into that piece of meat only. That's why Tosfot has a bit of a strength here because it wasn't even in the sauce. But if you moved the pot, meaning that the milk then got absorbed everywhere, and Rashi says immediately when it fell in. Okay, you didn't wait a few minutes and then it already got absorbed in that piece of meat, but you mixed it right away. Now you measure everything in the pot against the milk, and that's going to be a lot easier to nullify it. If it still gives flavor and all of that, then it will still be forbidden. Amar Abai. Now, this whole idea that the taste is what matters, is what we call ta'amov lo mamasho. If you have an actual taste of something, but you have not actual taste. You have taste of an item, but not the actual item. Like right now, this milk can't be seen anywhere. So it doesn't have any mamashut to it. It doesn't have any, not tangible, the milk. But it did give flavor. So that is be'alma de'oraita. Now, be'alma means all over, meaning in any kashrut issue, not just basar b'chalav, milk and meat. Anytime you have something not kosher, cooks with something else, we're going to go by taste. And taste will be a problem even if the actual item is no longer there. If it imparted its flavor, it will ruin things. Now comes Abai and he says, this is de'oraita. This is a Torah law. How do we know it's a Torah law? He proves it, even though Rav is going to disagree with his proof. De'isal kadatach to Rabbanan, because if you think it's only rabbinic, mi basar b'chalav my time lo gamrina. Now, basar b'chalav for sure has to do with taste because we're assuming basar and chalav mixed together, and it's going to be forbidden. The assumption is basar b'chalav is taste. Okay, meat gives flavor into the milk, milk gives flavor into the meat. We're assuming that that's taste. Now we're going to say basar b'chalav. If you think, then the assumption is basar b'chalav for sure taste is a Torah law. Now, if you would say it's only rabbinic and other things, then you would have to say that mi basar b'chalav my time lo gamrina. Now, why wouldn't you be able to learn from basar b'chalav to everything else? You would say dechidushu because basar b'chalav is some completely unique idea. Why is it such a completely unique idea? Rashi gives us two explanations. The first really unique reason about issue about basar b'chalav is it's a weird case because we have two permitted items, okay? If you take permitted item plus, 1 + 1 = 2. Permitted item plus permitted item should equal a permitted item. And forbidden item plus permitted item, right? Then you could see, well, maybe the forbidden item makes it the permitted item problematic. Here we have two heters. They're both completely permitted. When you cook them together, they become forbidden. That's already a chidush. That's different than treifa meat that gets mixed up with, in your pot of chullin. Okay? Now, second reason Rashi says, shederech bishul ne'esra belo achila. Every other kind of item, there's no prohibition to cook treif meat, but there is a prohibition to cook basar b'chalav even if you're not eating it. So there's two reasons to say this is a unique law, and then we'd say this is a unique law, and we don't learn from the Rabbi is trying to go the other track. He wants to say it's Torah law, all across the board, this idea of tam ki ikar or tam ovelo mamasho. But he's saying if you want to go the rabbinic track, you'd have to explain why don't we learn it from basar b'chalav, because it's a chidush. But ich chidushu, but he says if it's such a unique halacha, that's also obviously then more stringent, and that's why we're not tam the lo mamasho would be a problem, but not anywhere else. Well, then we should say, maybe it's so stringent that afagav delei kanotein tam nami. Maybe basar b'challah should be forbidden even if it gives no taste. Maybe any time milk falls into your pot, it's going to be forbidden even if there's no taste of the milk in the meat. Okay? So he says, I don't think then it's really a chidush. In which case, basar b'challah is going to be the paradigm for everything else. To which, Amar le Rava, derech bishul asra Torah. So Rava says, look, the Torah forbade. Rava says, I don't believe you. I'm not going to buy your idea that this isn't a chidush. And the reason I know it's not a chidush, you said, is because if it was really a chidush, even without taste. No, Rava says, what do you mean? It's a chidush. But the chidush is that it only goes by taste. And how do we know that? Or as part of the chidush? Because the Torah said cook. Now, what's the point of cooking if it doesn't give flavor? You're not bothering to cook anything together unless you want the flavor. What's cooking all about? It's about eating and the taste. So the fact that it says lo tevashel is a clear indicator that flavor is an issue here. And then you could say, maybe there's a unique halacha specifically by basar b'chalav, and it's not true across the board. And then, now we know that tamov v'lo mamsho is a problem, but we say that's a rabbinic law. Okay, that's the first section. Now we're going to move on to Rav. Now Rav goes back to this case in the Mishnah, where we have the milk that falls onto the piece of meat, but not on the other pieces. So Rav has a very famous halacha that we mentioned a few on Daf Kuf. Kevan shenatan tam b'chaticha, once the milk imparts flavor, let's say there's only 50 times the meat to the milk, so it will impart flavor and it will be a problem. Chaticha atzma na'aseit nevela v'oseret kol achatichot kulan. That piece of meat becomes a nevela, meaning it's not really a nevela. A nevela is an animal that died on its own, but it's got the law of a nevela. It's completely forbidden to eat. And what's the reason? Mipnei shehein mina. Because that whole piece of meat now is a piece that has milk and meat mixed together. The whole piece becomes forbidden, and now it can't be nullified in this pot with other meat because it's mino. And what do we know? Rabbi Yehuda holds min b'mino lo batel. You can't nullify two of the same things. That all comes from the blood. If you remember the dam par, the dam seir, we've seen many times. So he says, because they're the same type, they won't be nullified, the meat within the other meat. So the entire pot becomes forbidden if that one piece of meat is forbidden. Because of this, we call chanan chaticha na'aseit nevela. The chaticha, the piece, becomes a nevela itself. The whole piece is forbidden. Right? We don't take into consideration how much milk is in it. Now it's the piece of meat compared to all the other pieces, and because min b'mino is not batel, there's no nullification, the whole pot is problematic. So Amalei Marzutra bered Rav Meri Ravina. But Marzutra says to Ravina, wait a minute. Michti Rav Kaman Amar Lishmate Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, we know that Rav obviously said what he said according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says min b'mino is not nullified. Da'amar, that's what we're going to read right now. Da'amar min b'mino lo batel, because he says it's not nullified. But then, Lema Pliga de Rava, but what he says seems to go against Rava, because what did Rava say? Ta'amar Rava, Kasava Rabbi Yehuda, Rava says that Rabbi Yehuda holds, Kol shu min umino vid davar acher. If you have meat and something else, like, for instance, gravy, which is going on in this stew, there's gravy, saleket mino kemisha eno. Since there's min b'she'eno mino in this mixture, two different types, we view the mino, all those other pieces of meat, as if they're not there. B'she'eno mino rabat lavu mevatlo, and you can use the sauce to nullify the meat. So why don't we say that here? Why are we ignoring the gravy? To which Amar Lei, so we're saying maybe he disagrees with Rava about this point. To which they answer, Ravina answers him, Amar Lei, I denafel barotav raka hachinami. If it fell in a thin gravy, then I would agree with you. But hachabamayaskina, what are we talking about here? Kegon denafal ben rotev ava. We must be talking about a case where it fell into a very thick gravy. If the gravy is very thick, has pieces of meat in it, and then it's really min b'mino. Okay, so we have to have a case here where it's min b'mino. Otherwise, if it's min b'mino with eno mino, with two of the same type, but one of a different type, nullification would actually kick in, and Rav apparently doesn't disagree with what Rav said. Now, umay kasavar. Now we have to ask Rav's position about another issue. There's a machloket, which we're going to deal with a lot today, which is efshar l'sochto. What if, like our case, the milk gets into the meat? But if you cook up that meat more, the milk will come out eventually. If you could get the taste out of there, then that's efshar l'sochto. You could squeeze it out, theoretically, in some way. If you could squeeze it out, does that make it permitted? Because it's not really there permanently and it will come out. So this is machloket. Do we say efshar l'sochto is mutal or asul? So ika savar, if he holds, so we want to know where he holds on that debate. If he holds, if you can get it out, it will be permitted, then chaticha, ma'ina se nevela. Then you wouldn't have a case here where the whole piece of meat becomes a nevela, because the little bit of milk that went in is going to come out at some point. So you wouldn't turn the whole piece of meat into a nevela, because we view this piece of meat by saying if you could take it out, it's like saying we view this as two separate parts. Milk with the got absorbed in the meat, but when it comes out, it'll be permitted. So we're not going to then turn this entire piece into a piece of non-kosher meat. So we're going to say, Ela kasavar, he must hold, efshar l'sochto asul. Rav must hold on that side of the debate. And in fact, the Gemara says, the Itmar, it was actually said that he does. And we're going to see 3 rabbis on this side, 3 rabbis on the other. Rav, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, da Amrei, efshar l'sochto asul. Ushmuel, Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe, V'rish Lakish, da Amrei, efshar l'sochto mutal. Okay, so we have 3 on that side saying it's forbidden, 3 on that side which says permitted, and notice Rav is on the side of those forbidding. Sorry about that. Rav is on the side of those forbidding. To which they're going to ask, wait a minute, V'sava Rav, efshar l'sochto asul. But wait, we're going to see a different statement of Rav that seems to indicate, no, if you could squeeze it out, it's actually going to be permitted. How do we see that? Ha'itmar, wasn't it said, kizayet basal, shenafal letoch yorah shel chalav. We have a kizayet of meat that falls into a pot of boiling milk. Okay, it's the opposite of our case before. We had milk into meat into milk. Milk into meat. Now we have meat into milk. Amar Rav, basal asur v'chalav mutar. So the meat that fell in is forbidden. The milk that the meat was boiling in is permitted. So now we have to figure this out. Why? Because we assume the milk was absorbed into the meat. When you take the meat out of there, so the meat has flavor of milk in it, and it's going to be a problem. But the milk itself doesn't have enough of the meat in it to forbid it. So now we're going to say, what does this have to do with anything? Well, isa hadata afshar l'sochto asul. Now, if you say, even if you could get out the taste, it would be forbidden. Chalav amay mutar. Now, why would the milk be permitted? Chalav nivelahu. Okay, now, how do we get that chalav is like a nevela? Obviously, chalav is not a nevela. Nevela is a dead animal. But we mean it's like, because it's like the opposite case, where before we had the meat absorbed a bit of the milk, and it became a chaticha shenaseh nevela. The whole thing was a problem. So now we have, let's talk about this case. Rashi explains, the chalav, the little bit of milk, got absorbed into the meat, right? Now, we don't know how much milk. Could be a lot. Anyway, the milk gets absorbed into the meat. Now, what does it mean, efshar l'sochto? We could eventually get, so this meat fell in, but while it fell in, it absorbed milk along the way. And then what happens over time? It's going to spit out that milk. Now, if you say, efshar l'sochto mutal, if you say if you say efshar l'sochto asul, if you could get the taste out, it would be forbidden. Now, what's the problem? So, let's think about it. The chalav, the milk, gets absorbed into the meat, and then the milk spits out. Now, what's going to happen? The milk that's now next to the meat, okay, where the meat spit out the milk. Now, remember, what's that milk now? That milk is milk and meat mixed together. It's forbidden milk completely because it was inside the meat and then came out of the meat. So that's forbidden. That piece now, that little bit of milk that now spits out, is basically the milk right near there, okay, is going to all turn into chaticha na'aseh nevela, okay? And then it's going to forbid all the milk in the pot because, what we said, min b'mino lo batel. Remember, that's Rav. If we say, now, so the idea here is that the chalav should not be permitted because the chalav is an avela and it's now mixed with other milk, right? The chalav right near where the milk meat combo spits out of the meat. It then forbids everything in the pot. So the fact that Rav says that the milk is permitted is basically an indicator that he can't possibly say Afshar l'sochto asul. Because if you said Afshar l'sochto asul, even if you could get the flavor out, it would be forbidden, that milk area right nearby, that eventually, and it's, again, what's the problem? The milk nearby now gets milk and this milk-meat combo mixed in with it, and eventually it's going to come out of there, like it's going to get absorbed in the whole pot. But we're going to view that milk as if it's a chaticha of isur, and now that's milk mixed in with other milk, and it can't be canceled, and the whole thing should be forbidden. So, what are we going to answer to that question? Sounds like the chalav should be forbidden, and Rav says it's permitted. So, the Gemara is going to answer, Lo olam kasav Rav efshar l'chsochto asur. No, we're not going to change our opinion about what Rav holds. He obviously thinks if you could squeeze it out, it would be forbidden. And why is the milk and then not forbidden? You ready for this one? Very radical suggestion. Don't worry, it's only a suggestion, or maybe too bad it's only a suggestion. Shanei hatam da amar kra lo tivashel gedi b'chalev imo. Gedi asra Torah v'lo chalav. It's only forbidden to put milk into meat. Don't cook a gedi in the milk of its mother, but, right, only gedi asra Torah. It's the meat that gets milk cooked in with it, not milk that has meat cooked in with it. So this milk is not forbidden because it's not part of the Torah prohibition. Okay, it means basar b'chalav only goes one way. Okay, it's meat that's the problem if it gets mixed with milk. Milk isn't a problem because it says don't cook your gedi with milk. That's a better way of translating it than I did before, right? Don't cook your kid, your baby goat, with milk. Okay, but didn't say don't cook your milk with meat. Okay, so now the Gemara says, obviously, how could you possibly say that? And here they're going to prove it for a bit of an oddball case. You have a half a kasayit of basal and half a kasayit of chalav. So each one is not a whole shi'or, whole requisite amount that would usually be forbidden. And you cook them together. Amarav, loke alachilato veino lokel bishulo. You're going to get lashes for eating it. You're not going to get lashes for cooking. We're going to deal with that soon, the cooking part. But right now we're focusing on the fact you get lashes for eating it. Now, if you're just saying it's forbidden to eat milk, it's forbidden to eat meat that's mixed with milk, then velo chalav achila lamai loket chatzi shiurhu. All you have here is a half a zayit of meat, and you're eating it. It's mixed with a half a zayit of chalav, so it's true you're eating a whole kasayit. But if the prohibition is only on the gedi, only on the meat, then you would need a whole zayit, a whole olive bulk of meat. So it must be that's not true. Okay, so that was a bad answer. Let's try a second one. Elul olam kasav Rav chalav nami asur. Rav must hold that the milk is also forbidden. And what's the case here? They're saying there's a technical reason here why the milk is permitted. Because you threw the meat, or the meat by accident fell into this boiling pot of milk. And while it's boiling, the meat can absorb the milk, but the milk can't absorb anything from the meat. So it can't swallow back milk that was swallowed into the meat. Okay? And then, now why is this? So either you say because it's boiling, and while it's boiling, it can't do that. And then the Gemara says, sof sof kinaya chadar palit, but as soon as it stops boiling, it could. So they say, fine, so kisha kidin v'silko. When it says the milk is permitted, it means that you took out the meat before it stopped boiling. And then there was never a bi-directional thing where it first got absorbed and then got spit out. It only got absorbed the milk. It never got spit out, and that's why we don't get into this problem of efshar l'sochto mutar asur and the milk that's nearby turning into a nevela. We don't have that whole issue. Tosfot has a bit of a different explanation of mivla bala bifla lo palit. Okay, we said that it's because it's boiling, and when it's boiling, it doesn't absorb. So Tosfot asks a very good question. They say, okay, wait a minute. But he says, davar hanir'eh le'einayim hu depalit. He says, but everybody sees. I mean, Tosfot dibor mitchil shenafal letoch yorah rotachat. He says, Tama, this doesn't make any sense. It's davar hanir'eh le'einayim hu depalit. It's spitting. The fact that you put something in boiling water, right, and it spits out something, we see with our eyes. Like kishenonim yarak b'ktera rotachat. Mishtanem or eat hamayim min yarak. I made the mistake once of making a soup with I got these purple potatoes or something like that, purple, maybe sweet potatoes, and they turn the whole soup purple, right? It definitely colors your food. See this really anywhere. That was just a very obvious case. Okay, so basically they say this happens. So how can you explain that it doesn't spit out? To which Rabbeinu, we have two explanations in Tosfot. One is or two that I'll quote you. Rabbeinu Shmuel says, until ad sheyeh saveh milivlo. First it's going to absorb all the milk, and only once it's finished absorbing, then it's going to spit out. And we must be talking about here if you took it out before it got to that stage. That's Rabbeinu Shmuel. Rabbeinu Tam says, it won't spit out what it just absorbed. So if this absorbed the milk, it won't spit out the milk, this meat. But it will absorb something that was in it before, and that's how Tosfot tries to explain the issue. But it seems to be a bit of a question here about the reality of this statement. Okay, Gufa. Now we're going to go back. So that was a resolution to, right, does Rav really hold that Efshar l'suchto asul? If so, what about this milk? And we resolve it with our second attempt. Now the Gemara says Gufa. We want to go back to that half a zayit case. Chatzi zayit basar v'chatzi zayit chalav shenafal l'toch shebishlan zeim zeh amarav lokel achilato ve'ino lokel bishulo. So now we have to figure out why you're getting lashes on the eating but not on the cooking. To which the Gemara asks, manavshach, I don't get it. Either way, it should be either you're chayav in both or you're chayav in neither. If you view this half zayit goes together with the other half zayit to fill a whole shiur requisite amount, abishol nami lilke, you should get lashes for the cooking also. And if they don't join together, achila nami lo lilke, then you shouldn't get lashes for the eating either, right? So either it should be all or nothing. La'olam lo mitztarfe. So they said they really don't combine. Ubevam yoreg dola. Now, Rashi helps us out here a little bit and says that the two cases are a little bit different. Rashi uses the word litzdadin. Litzdadin means each one is a bit different. The first, the achila, and the achila and the bishul are talking about different cases, even though it's hard to explain it this way. And it's hard to say that he made this statement, half a side this, half a side that, you're liable for eating, not for cooking. Well, you're liable for eating when it's in a big pot and you cooked more than a kazayit of meat with your milk. And then you took out a half a zayit of meat and a half a zayit of cheese, and you ate them together, okay, from this combined mixture. That's what you would have to say, and that's why you're liable for eating, because it was already cooked in a big pot. But if you cook up from the start, just a half a zayit of this and a half a zayit of that, you don't have a full requisite amount of either one, and you're not going to be liable. That's Rav's position. Okay, that's how we explain it. But now they bring Levi, who disagrees with this. But Levi Amar, af lokel bishulo. You're also going to get lashes on cooking it, because a half and a half equal a whole, and you have a whole of, again, this goes back to the whole chidush issue. The whole thing is having these two heterim together, and it creates a new entity. The new entity is now a kazayit. You're liable. V'chein tani Levi b'manite, and he says so in a braita. Kashem shalokel achilato, kach lokel bishulo. Just like you're liable for eating, you're going to be liable for cooking them. Ube'eze bishul amru. What kind of cooking are we talking about? You're going to be liable for. That means something cooked that other people, Rashi says that means non-Jews, because it's not kosher for us, non-Jews would eat it on account of it being cooked. Rashi says that means it was completely cooked. Okay, it has to be completely cooked for you to be liable for cooking. Now we're just going to end with and start this sugya, which we won't finish yet today, which is Efshar l'sochto atzmo tenaihi. The whole idea of whether Efshar l'sochto is permitted or forbidden is a machloket between Tanaim. Today we're going to see the Tanaitic opinion that Efshar l'sochto is asur, the one that matches Rav. And in tomorrow's daf we're going to see a different Tanaitic opinion that Efshar l'sochto mutal. So we're just going to get started with this. Titania says in a braita, tipach halav shenafla l'chaticha, again like our Mishnah, drop of milk falls on a piece of meat. Kevan shenana tam b'chaticha, achaticha atzma naseh nevela v'oseret kol hachatichot kulan. This is exactly what Rav said. Now we see it says it in a braita. Since it gives flavor into that one piece of meat, that piece of meat becomes a completely forbidden piece of meat. And this is Rabbi Yehuda, it says it explicitly, and it forbids all the other pieces because they're all the same type. The Chachamim omrim, the rabbis say, Ad shetitain tam berotev ubakivpa ubachatichot. The rabbis say, no, we view this piece of milk compared to everything that was in the pot. Now, Rebbe comes and says, I'm a Rebbe. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, Nir'im divrei Rabbi Yehuda b'shaloni er v'shalo kisa. I would tend to say like Rabbi Yehuda in a case where it wasn't shaken and it wasn't covered, the pot. But divrei chachamim b'sheni er v'kisa. And I would hold like the rabbis that we view it against the whole thing. If you shook it up, mixed it, or if you covered it, because covering, again, combines all the flavors together from, as you know, when you cover a pot, everything gets mixed in. Now, my loni erva lo kisan. Now, let's explain what Rebbe said about loni erva lo kisan. Now, we're going to see it's not what we thought a second ago. Ilema loni er klava lo kisa klal. If you're going to say, you didn't mix it at all, you didn't cover it all, mivla bala. Well, then, it's, of course, that piece absorbed it. So, I'm sorry, mivla bala, the piece absorbed it, but miflat lo pala. So the piece absorbed it, but it didn't spit it out. Okay, so now they're going to say like this. Okay, so just one second. Right. So we're now going to say, the issue is here, that if you say that you didn't cover it at all, if you didn't cover it at all, then what happens? The piece absorbs the milk, but it never spits the milk out into anything else. So it shouldn't actually be forbidden. Ela, so they say it must be loni er, and there has to be some way it got mixed in, otherwise it wouldn't make any sense here that the rest of the meat would be forbidden. It would just be the top piece of meat is forbidden because it absorbed the milk, and that's it. So it must be ela loni er b'tchila, ela b'sof, v'lo kisa b'tchila, ela b'sof. It must be. You didn't mix it at first, or you didn't cover it at first, and that's why it all got absorbed in that one piece of meat, and then you mixed it, or then you covered it. Okay? That's how you have to explain it. Now, why? Now they say, wait. Now we're going to say, why is this a problem? Habala v'hapalat. Now, again, if you say efshar l'sochto mutal, then once the meat absorbed the milk, later it's going to spit it out. So why should this one piece of milk be considered a piece of meat with the milk in it be considered an avela that's now going to forbid all the other chatichot, if not for kasaval efshar l'sochto asu? Must hold that since you could, even if you can squeeze it out, it's still going to be forbidden, and that's why this piece of meat forbids all the other pieces. This just goes with what Rav said earlier. It's just now we saw it was a machloka between 3 amoraim versus 3 amoraim. Now we're going to see this is actually a machloka tanaim, and Rebbe, who says this, looks like I would hold like Rabbi Yehuda in this area, and the rabbis in the other, but the area holds like Rabbi Yehuda is because he must hold. Rebbe holds efshar l'sochto asu. And with that, we end our daf, and we'll continue with this tomorrow. So, what did we do? We talked about this drop of milk that falls into the meat. It turns that whole piece into an avela, according to Rav, right? The Mishnah said we look at the milk compared just to that piece of meat, and then Rav goes even farther, say the whole piece of meat becomes an avela. And that really depends on whether you say efshar l'sochto mutar or asur. If you say efshar l'sochto mutal, then since the flavor will ultimately come out of that meat won't become a chaticha v'isur. And again, if you hold by Rabbi Yehuda, that min b'mino is not batel, you can't nullify two of the same items, that meat is going to forbid all the rest of the meat in the pot. Unless, as we said, if there's enough gravy, right? And if there's gravy there and it's thin gravy, then the gravy can help cancel out the meat. But otherwise, it can't because it's meat and meat. Okay, with that, we got into this machloket about efshar l'sochto mutar asur, which we ended with. It's actually a machloket between Tanaim, not just Amoraim. And in between, we got into, does Rav really hold efshar l'sochto asur? What about that case with the milk? Well, we came up with, after the second attempt, we came up with a reason to explain why that would be. And within that, we mentioned this half zayit, so we had to understand that case, and we saw the machloket Rav and Levi about the case of a half zayit, chalav and a half zayit, basar, which were cooked together. And with that, we finish today's daf. Wishing everyone a good day and a good week.